The Consulting Success podcast is powered by the Clarity Coaching Program. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team and receive personal coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to find out more and apply.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Today, I'm joined by and very excited to have Gustavo Razzetti. Wonderful to have you with us today.
Thank you, Michael. Very excited about the conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
So, Gustavo, you're an author. We'll talk about your book. You're a speaker. You're also the CEO of Fearless Culture, where you help your clients develop purposeful cultures. Your clients include organizations like the American Medical Association, the Federal Aviation Administration, Continental, a whole bunch of others. And as part of your kind of previous life, which we'll touch on, you've worked with many brands of all different kind of shapes and sizes and so forth. Your work has also been featured in the New York Times, Forbes, BBC News. And then your book is called Remote Not Distant: Design a Company Culture that will help you thrive in a hybrid workplace. Is that all correct?
That's all correct.
Okay. All right. Good. I want to make sure that we got started on the right foot there. So I like to start off more in your earlier years before you got to where you are today. And you have quite a history in advertising media before you started your current business, which we'll talk a lot more about. I'm wondering, when you look at the different agencies that you worked at and different media companies and so forth, do you feel that helped you as you now started your current kind of consulting business, where I know you have workshops and so forth, but what was the impact of that previous work experience on your business today and when you started that business?
Yeah, there are two aspects to it. One was what was the trigger? What triggered me to say, hey, now I'm going to go solo and start my own business? And the other is, how was I able to leverage everything that I learned through my practice in a different discipline and put it into the service of my new business? So I worked for many years in marketing, advertising, and innovation. And one of the things that basically clients paid us for was to help them come up with new ideas. Mm-hmm. A marketing campaign, advertising campaign, or new products, new solutions. At some point, I realized that companies have much more ideas than they think they need, but what they lack is the right culture. So most of the ideas that companies have never see the light of day. They're dead before arrival. Mm-hmm. Because there's politics, before there's fear, because people don't want to fight battles in order to make things happen, and so on and so forth. So that was what triggered me to say, hey, well, let's focus on a different side, which is the culture aspect. That's how I decided to start my consulting firm like 5.5 years ago.
Right.
But to the other part of the question, what did I learn? I learned the things that I wanted to keep when I work in large firms, like consulting firms, which is the quality, the standards, being very aggressive, always making sure that large clients are looking for great ideas. But on the other hand, when you work in a large firm, you're forced, not forced, but you kind of to work with any client. And in my case, I decided from day one that I was going to be very chooseful about the type of clients that I want to work. I don't want to work with I want to work with clients that are really into it, that want to do the hard work, that are open to changing the culture, that they're not looking for silver bullets. They know that change, and especially culture change, is not easy. So those were some of the parameters are built. So I think that, as I always said, that everything we do in life, we can turn in something else later. So the more we do, the better prepared we are for whatever the future take us to.
And your answer right now just kind of hit on several of my follow-up questions, or ones that I was planning on asking about. So what I heard you say is that one of the reasons why you started your own consulting business and kind of getting into this new venture was because if you stayed inside of the corporate world or inside of a larger organization, you wouldn't have the ability to necessarily pick and choose which projects to work on. Was that something that was bubbling up inside of you for a long time, or was it just happened over a matter of months or a year? Kind of give us a sense of how long you had this idea of really starting your own thing in the more recent years.
That's a great question, because I think that we need to kind of be honest with ourselves. One thing is the eureka moment when we realize and we see things with clarity. But I think the suffering, the moment that things start to bubble and prepare and turn into something different, usually it's a lot. No, so in my case, were many years. To be honest, it wasn't like 1 month I woke up and said, "Hey, I'm going to change the world," which I haven't. But you know the point. But there were also a couple of triggers. One of them is that I was invited to attend a program at Stanford, Change Leadership. I'd spent 3 months there. I was still running an agency remotely, but I was mostly focused on that. And I went through a lot of challenges, a lot of activities, a lot of questions. Working with students that were like 20, 30 years younger than me. They were starting, I was in the, what's the good future going to look like for me? And I realized that I wasn't giving my clients a service, to be honest, that I wasn't giving them my best. No client complaints. They were super happy. But I realized, hey, if I look into the past, I did a much better work. And what happened? I became good at doing my work easy and clients were happy, but I wasn't challenging myself and I thought I could provide something. So to be honest, I realized that and I say, hey, I need to do something about it. I was turning 50 or something like that. And I say, well, this is a moment to take another leap. And I took it.
And the second thing that you mentioned is that you set some clear kind of criteria that you would use to qualify and therefore accept or quote unquote kind of deny potential clients, right? That you didn't want to work with anybody. You want to work with a very specific select group of clients. Now, kind of looking back over the last 5 years or so of running your company, Fearless Culture, how successful would you say that you've been in really only accepting the best types of clients or the ones that you feel would be most appropriate? Is that something that you've been able to be very strict with? Or have you found yourself that at times you kind of open up that funnel maybe a little bit wider than you would have liked to and end up working with some clients that maybe aren't the best fit, or you look back on thinking like, yeah, that really wasn't ideal for us?
Good point. I mean, I wouldn't say that all the clients I work with were perfect, none are, but I'm still very strict with that criteria.
Yeah.
So let me tell you a different side of the story, which is a few months ago, I was in California with a client and we're talking and say, well, you now have your book and you're doing great. You have lots of clients, blah, blah, and all that. So looking at the result of 5 years of work with my team. And so we started talking about exactly this, how I'm very mindful about the types of clients I want to work. I say, well, now you have the luxury because you're doing great, so you can do it. And say, no, I did this since I started. And say, no, that cannot be. I say, yeah. So it was painful. So I said no to a lot of contracts and no to a lot of nice fees and opportunities, but in the end, it paid off. So if you're able to stick to your guns and be consistent, it pays off. I mean, yeah, there are moments that I was, oh man, I need money, or I was stuck, or I was afraid, or worried. But I say, you know what? You made already a choice. Stick to it.
Yeah, and that's really like, Gustavo, I mean, you're taking me to the place that I'm putting myself in the position of probably many people joining us right now, who some have been consulting and building their businesses for many years, and they still are not as strict as they probably want to be with who they work with, right? Because they say yes to a project because the revenue's there, and then they kind of take it along, and the next they say to themselves, well, maybe going forward, I'll say no to those kinds of projects, but then the next project comes along and it's lucrative, so they say yes to it again. Or others who are just earlier stage and they feel like they need to say yes to the projects because they need that cash flow and they need the experience, they need to build their business. So I'm very interested in your mindset when you were presented back in the day, and maybe even still today, with opportunities that you didn't feel were the right fit for the type of client that you wanted or the type of work that you were really focusing on, but they were lucrative. They would have paid you handsomely to say yes to, but you said no. A lot of people in that situation would say yes to it because, again, it's a lucrative opportunity. So walk us through kind of the rationale and the mindset that you had at that time, or maybe still have today. Like, how do you make those decisions?
Yeah. First of all, I want to make sure that no one feels bad if you say no to a lucrative business and like flex your approach. So I'm not here to preach and make you feel bad about it. One thing that I realized is there are thousands of consulting firms out there. So consistency, it's hard to find. And so it's important that we basically walk the talk and we're able to present something different to our clients. So that was part also of the idea. Not only it's a decision, but it's also a way of positioning yourself in front of our clients.
I'm sorry to interrupt, just to jump in, because you're making a really interesting point there. How important was that aspect, or is that aspect for you, that positioning? And when you have people approaching you and you say like, no, we only can work with this kind of group of clients, do you think, looking back over the 5.5 or so years of experience now of building this consulting business, do you think that actually had a big impact? Or was that just kind of a side outcome or result?
No, I think it was fundamental. And why? Because it helped me stay true to who I am, how I want to work, how my team works. So the way we show up in front of clients, super authentic and genuine. And also on their hand, we have a lot of flexibility to be more honest with our clients, because I tell them upfront. I tell them, look, first of all, people say, hey, do you have more space to take another client? Say, well, it all depends. No, so, but my point is, okay, the same way you're screening me and probably you're talking to our consultants, we're going to do exactly the same. So we want to have a conversation with you. Usually there's someone from HR reaching out and say, well, we want to talk to your CEO. So if your CEO is not available for a talk before we actually kick off a project, that's a red flag. No? Is this so important that the other thing that we ask people is, are you willing to basically put the effort? No. Imagine that we as consultants, we are like a trainer. You go to the gym, you say, hey, I want to lose some pounds, I want to get fitter, whatever the goal is. And yeah, your trainer can define whatever activity, eating, like a diet, whatever they want to give you. But in the end, if you're not willing to put the effort yourself, then the consultant work goes nowhere. No? So I think that those are things that are important for me. I can tell you, because it's not easy. There were many moments I would say, what the heck am I done? But now looking in retrospect, I think it was a great decision. And once again, it helped me. It made me actually, you know, that we have this, when we're building our business, we sometimes have self-doubt because are we good enough? Are we better than the others? All those kind of questions that we ask ourselves as humans. And in my case, it helped me get rid of those questions because I was consistent. So I didn't have that doubt because of sticking to my plan. And to wrap up and going to the next question, is like one thing you asked before, why did it work? Because usually when it comes to making decisions, we define our criteria when we're confronted with our decision. By defining the type of clients I wanted to work with when I started, every time I faced a client, I was ready. So I didn't hesitate. I say, does this client follow in the criteria or does it not? So it was more like, yes or no.
And how about the money question? So for a lot of people, the money is what sways them to say yes to a client or a project that is less than ideal. How did you deal with that?
Well, good point. At some point, it was tough financially, but I think that the money question is you don't talk money to the client until you filter them. So you talk money, you already have an estimate, a fee there. So when you're talking and there's no any fee attached to the conversation, so it feels less painful because you don't feel, oh, I'm losing $100,000. No, it's just another guy who called me.
Right. So
I always, no, please go ahead.
No, I was going to clarify there. So what I'm hearing you say is that because your conversations, you had that filter set right at the beginning. So before you even talk to a prospective client and buyer, you would know whether they meet the criteria or not. And if they did in that early conversation, or even from that initial kind of touch point, then you might go further, but you wouldn't actually know what you stand to quote unquote kind of like lose from a financial perspective, because you wouldn't even go that far in a conversation with somebody if you didn't feel like they were matching the criteria that you set out as somebody being a true ideal client.
Exactly. So in that sense, emotionally and psychologically, you don't feel, because when you write a proposal, you already think that you're going to win it. But when you never put an estimate to that proposal, there's no money that's lost. On the other hand, it's like time is limited. We can make more time, but you're going to work more. So the moment you get into a client, that's going to be a pain in the butt, and the client's going to steal time that you don't have, and it's going to make you feel unworthy or unhappy or whatever word comes to your mind. That's the time that you're stealing or taking away from other opportunities. So when you remove the noise, you make time and space for the real clients that you want. So that's kind of the
No, I think that's a really great point. It's one that we've talked to many clients about as they really start kind of growing their businesses, that in almost every situation, when you take on a client that deep down inside, you know, like you had some hesitation, there's just that gut feeling that this is probably not the best scenario or setup. Anytime a consultant takes on that client, even though you might be making money, you almost always regret it, right? And you think to yourself, oh, the money's not even worth it at that point. So I think the point that you're making is such an important one, which is getting very clear about the criteria of what is the kind of client that you want, what kind of engagements do you want, and then using that as a filter early on. So shifting now to your business, when you opened the doors 5.5 years ago or so, I would imagine that with your track record and your career of working in many different organizations and many that were kind of like agencies, or they had access to lots of different types of clients and vendors and partners and so forth, that you would have a network that you could kind of call upon to get the business started. And so I'm wondering, where did your first clients come from? Was it the result of your network, or what do you get, or what do you do to get in the first few clients into the new business?
I hope it was, but it wasn't.
Okay, and good. Yes, tell me. Yeah,
interesting. No. And I was like, oh, this is going to be kind of easy, like two things. First, like people, I mean, they judge you by what they know about you. And many people work with me in one space, And now I mentioned I shift to culture, which is a different discipline, different animal. You need to talk to different people. So most of my relationships were on the marketing side of companies. This is more HR, CEOs and stuff. But also people get to, oh, you're very good at this. They don't immediately think that you can also be very good at something else. It's like you only have one talent and that's it. But still, I have other relationships that weren't necessarily clients that help me get into other people. One thing that worked a lot is, at least in the short term, is looking for partners that can help me get in front of clients. I started doing some open workshops. Now I do very few workshops, let's say, for free. Those were more like a taster, inviting some clients to experience a 1 hour workshop.
Gustavo, sorry to interrupt, but just to confirm or kind of clarify, when you say partners, can you describe what kind of partner? Give us a sense of, and a bit more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there were other people that were on the same, for example, there was an innovation firm that their business was about selling solutions. They didn't care about culture, but they saw, hey, if I present notions about culture, it's going to be like added value to my clients.
Right.
And that's where we ended doing some stuff. So that was a nice way to get in front of clients. The other area in which I continue to invest a lot of time and pay off, but once again, in the long run, was writing. So I said, rather than I'm not good at knocking doors, cold calls and that stuff. And also cold calls are going to get you into the wrong client, or at least in my perspective. So I decided one criteria to filter clients is writing. So I started writing like hell. I published so far like over 500, 600 articles. And some really long, like 30,000 words.
And where were you publishing these? Were these all on your own blog? Were you publishing them in other publications? Kind of walk us through, like, what was the goal that you had in mind when you set off and decided, I'm going to start writing?
Yeah, I started publishing in my own blog, and then I moved into Medium when Medium started being a thing. I was actually making a lot of money in Medium at some point until they changed their model. I got pissed off and stopped writing in Medium. Right. But that helped me a lot. And then one person read one of my articles and introduced me to Psychology Today. So I've been having like a column there for the past 2 years. And then I started getting people like wanted to republish some of my articles with some tweaks. And so I started doing that. So once again, consistency. For me, that's what pays off. Now, when you stick to something and you do it, people say, you publish, you hit the publish bottom, and then probably 500 people read it or 100. And then at some point you get into the thousands and the 100,000s, and then you start paying for that stuff because people are getting what you do. So
right. So you started writing on your own blog, then you kind of created more leverage by going after publications that would have access to your ideal clients, right? So you write one article for them and you reach hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people and so forth. How long did it take from the time that you started writing to the time that you started actually having people reach out to you and say, I read your article on fill in the blank publication, to a point where like that actually, it didn't just happen once, but it happened kind of over and over. There was some like level of consistency to it. How long did that take for you to achieve that?
Yeah, good question, because you're always going to have a moment of luck, that someone's going to call for whatever reason, hey, I want to interview or republish your article. But consistency took over 1 year or year and a half to get that results. Yeah.
And what were you telling yourself? Like what happens, I've seen this multiple times, Gustavo, and I don't know if this ever occurred to you or you just have like a very strong mindset, but for a lot of people, they'll get excited about, I'm going to jump on social media, or I'm going to write, or I'm going to try and present, and they start, but then they don't see the result from it very quickly. And then they stop, right? And they look for the next kind of shiny object or the next thing that people are talking about online. For you, you stuck to it a year and a half, consistently writing. Did you ever have that mindset or just that question come up, like, should I continue doing this? I'm not getting any results from it. And if so, what kept you going?
Good point. Yes, I have the same questions that most of your audience is going to have because we're all human. So we have suffer from the same problems. I would say that there are a couple of things. First, I was obsessed like anyone about the outcome, And when I stopped being obsessed about the outcome, I started writing with more rhythm, with more energy. I wasn't trying to please an audience. So I use writing not just to, hey, I'm going to get a client. I say, I'm going to start sharing with the world what I think. And by writing more and more, I was becoming better at thinking, at presenting a different perspective about why I can help companies and how I help or how I can't. Because sometimes you need to tell a client, hey, that's not what I do. And that's also part of being consistent and coherent. So that's a thing that helped me because I say, yes, I want people to read what I write, but you need to understand. One person told me early on that the first blogs that you publish, no one's going to read them. So you're building a habit, you're building an audience. And if your blog has one post, no one's going to go there. You need to have a lot of content.
Right.
On the other hand, it happened to me. I mentioned I was doing these workshops to try to generate leads. And with this guy, and at some point we did one, a lot of people came, but then we did one and there were only 4 people. And we felt like, oh, all this content, all the energy, the preparation just for 4 people. And I said to myself, why instead of focusing on those who didn't show up, why don't we put the energy in the people that really care about what we do? So instead of thinking about the hundreds of thousands of clients in the world, focus on those people that really care about your business, the people that come and show up. So don't write for the masses, because unless you want to be a writer, live from your writing. But if you're trying to build a relationship, focus on the people that read. If there are 100 and they read you often, I have people that start reading my blog since day one, and after 5 years, they're still there.
Hey, it's Michael here, and we'll be right back to the podcast. But first, are you ready to grow, scale, and take your consulting business and marketing to the next level? If so, our Clarity Coaching program may be a great fit for you. You'll work with our experienced team to set up a strategic plan for your business and coach you step by step in areas like how to consistently attract more leads, develop a magnetic message that resonates with your ideal clients, strategically package and position your services, earn higher fees, win more proposals, and scale your business. To find out more about Clarity Coaching and apply, go to consultingsuccess.com and click on coaching.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I have a couple of stories kind of come to mind from you. One is that we always try and track when people become clients, how long have they been in the world of consulting success? And we had one client who told us that they had been reading our articles, checking out the podcasts, books, just different stuff that we put into the world, much of it for free, for over 10 years before they actually reached out and became a client. And then another told me that I think she was actually 11 or 12 years, and we've been around about 13 years. So it's just interesting that long-term mindset, if you're not attached to converting people and like if you're not thinking transactional, but you're thinking much more about relationships, then you don't really mind. You put your stuff out, you know that good things will come from that. Actually, I want to shift because there's a couple of things I want to make sure that we can fit in the time that we have together today. If I look at your career, I mean, you've spent a lot of time thinking about culture, about change, and how culture is applied inside of organizations. When you think about smaller companies, so the company that has 5 people or let's say 10 people or 30 people or 50, what distinctions or differences do you think about from a culture perspective? So if you're a leader, Gustavo, at a company with 5 people, how do you think about culture and what are you focused on? And how does that compare to, let's say, a leader in a company that has 10 people and as opposed to one that might have 50 people or 100 people? Like, what changes? What do people need to be thinking about? And what distinctions exist from a culture perspective if you're the leader inside of these different sizes of organizations?
Yeah, perfect. I think that when you're a small business, culture is more transparent, more obvious, and that's good. But also it's more homogeneous. So if you have 5 people or 10 people and one of them is an outlier, doesn't necessarily accept the norms and how the team wants to operate or the vision for the company, then that person is not going to last too long. In larger companies, we live and clients live under this impression that culture can be homogeneous. But actually, the culture of a large company is the result of lots of subcultures. Because to your point, we as human beings have a stronger sense of belonging to smaller groups. Let's say your family, your friends, your sports club, than to the country or the world or the company that has 15,000 employees.
Right. That makes sense. And what are the most common mistakes that you see people making when it comes to culture? And when I ask this question, I'm really thinking about the owner of a small consulting firm. Mm-hmm. What are the most common kind of blunders or errors or just things that people aren't paying attention to?
A culture matters in any size, shape, or form. So a family of four, parents and two kids, it already has a culture. It has what's accepted, what's not accepted, how we communicate with each other. Do we confront a conflict in the open? Do we avoid the tough conversations? Do we get very emotional when something becomes personal? Or do we address conflict in a more civilized way? So the culture of your team, of your company, 5, 10 consultants, shapes the way, and people can see that from day one. So the moment they talk to one of your team members, they're going to see if your culture is consistent or not. They talk to you as CEO because probably that's the first contact when you're building a relationship. But then when you have a coaching session or a workshop and someone else from your company is there, they immediately going to sense, is this team aligned? Is this team happy? Is this team chaotic? They're going to get those signs super fast. Huh?
Right.
And if you don't take care about your culture, it's going to backfire.
Right. Definitely. So there's a lot that you cover inside of your book and in your writings about culture. And so, of course, we can't fit it all just in our short conversation today. But for the consulting business owner that is recognizing or has recognized the importance of culture inside of their company, or maybe they just want to make it a bigger part of their company, what are maybe 2 or 3 best practices or ideas or just areas they should be focused on to strengthen the culture inside of their business?
Yeah. I think one thing that's very, very important is the alignment between what we say and what we do. And so, for example, people talk a lot about values. Now, usually when you talk about culture, people immediately respond to you with values, like if it was the only element. Culture has many more elements than just values. But the point is, having a list of values doesn't build a strong culture. So one thing that we do on activities, what are the behaviors that we reward and what are the behaviors that we punish? And that helps you understand really how people get hired, promoted, get kudos, and how people in the end should get fired if they don't improve their behaviors. So for example, I mentioned like Slack has the no assholes rule, no? And same as Netflix. So basically they don't want to work with people regardless of how smart they are if they're not a nice human being. But for example, I was working with a client that we uncover a paradox of what we reward and punish, because sometimes we are rewarding and punishing the wrong things. These people were giving low performers a pass. So basically they were rewarding low performers, but letting them stay in the company, not doing anything about it. On their hand, they were punishing high performers because not only they let these guys be part of the company, but actually these guys, the high performers, had to take over the task that the other people weren't completing. So they were punishing their best people by not taking care of the worst people.
And why were they doing that? Was it just the attitudes of those high performers, or why that punishment come into play?
It's a punishment because you give them more work. So you increase the workload of the people now. So because you're a higher achiever, I give you more work because this team B is not doing their work. So I'm going to give it to team A. But in the end, this team is working 14 hours and they're working 5.
Right.
That's the point. So they're not punishing them on purpose. They don't realize, this is something that first leaders avoid conflict. So they don't want to talk to underperformers, but also we tend to focus on the people that do great and we think that giving them more work is a reward. But actually at some point it becomes a burden.
Right. Yeah. So I'd love to transition now and kind of on the same line. We're talking about culture. And one thing that we've all been going through over the last several years is this kind of transition to the hybrid workplace. And that's really what your new book is about, right? Remote, not distant. I'm wondering, when we explore culture and we've just kind of scratched the surface on a couple of things here, what are the big differences, if any, that a consulting business owner needs to keep in mind? Because so many of us now have remote teams and we're not in the same office space with our team on a regular basis. So for you, Gustavo, in your business, as well as with clients, like what are some of these best practices or ideas or things that people should be focused on in the hybrid workplace? And I'm just wondering, like, what are the big distinctions between maybe the old model of everybody being in one location compared to where we are today for many of us?
That's a good point, Dave, when you said all in the one location, because what the pandemic caused at first was we moved from being all in the office to being everyone working mostly from home.
Yeah.
Now people have the choice to work remotely, which doesn't necessarily mean from home. It could be from a co-working space, could be from my family member's house, could be from a coffee shop, whatever, and then went to work in the office. So I think that first people gained a flexibility during the pandemic that they don't want to let go. So now people want to design their work day around their life and not the other way around. And this is really critical, because if we fight back that, we're only wasting time and learning part of the learning curve, because this is not going to go away. People are fighting for this. There are many companies that we see that they are offering flexibility, and not just from location, but flexibility in terms of schedule, how we work, and anything in between. So that's a benefit that people already have acquired, and they're not going to let go of it.
Mm-hmm.
However, with flexibility comes intentionality. You need to be more obsessive, more disciplined in how you make that team work together. So if you, for example, Michael says, hey, I'm going to work, I don't know, from 7 to 9 because I'm an early riser, and Gustavo likes, which is true, work after 9 p.m. because he's a night owl. Well, we also need to make sure that we find some shared time in which we can collaborate. So let's say from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., all team members are going to be available for if anyone needs me, for meetings, for calls, whatever. So that balance between people flexibility, but also have a team contract that's very disciplined, it's going to offset that. So I think that's the core. Many leaders are fighting the flexibility aspect because they see that employees are trying to take advantage of it, like saying, hey, people are going to work around the system, they're going to slack off, they're not going to work. Truth is, most of the people are not there. Yeah, there are always going to be some people that want to abuse the system, but the majority of people driven by good intentions. So the better we give them, the more flexibility we give them, people are going to pay off in dividends. Because when you trust people, people are going to return that trust exponentially. When you don't trust, when you try to control people, people are going to beat the system still, even if it's very rigid.
Right.
So usually when there are more rules in the workplace is when people are worse. The best cultures, for example, are the ones that are very flexible, but also have fewer rules because they show that they trust people. So going back to your question, what changed? Trust was an issue before the pandemic, and now it's become even more evident that managers and leaders don't trust their teams. But if you don't trust your team more than ever,
right,
you're going to have a lot of problems.
So, let's explore that for a moment and kind of go a little bit further together. Take the consulting business owner who has kind of a distributed team. People are working virtually, maybe in different places around the world, maybe even in the same city, but they're not in the same location on a regular and consistent basis. They want to provide the flexibility for their team members, but maybe deep down inside, they have concerns of, if like they can't see that person. So if they're not sending messages on Skype or Slack all the time, which hopefully people aren't, right, then you don't know how much they're necessarily accomplishing, or you're wondering, are they actually being productive or working on the most important thing? So in your mind, what's the best practice? Is it about getting very clear and setting outcomes that everybody is in alignment and in agreement with? Or is there some other approach that you find to be more effective to ensure that for a leader, they know their team is moving in the right direction and getting the right things done, even though they can't see that person physically?
Absolutely. I think that you nailed it. It's about having clear outcomes. So when you agree on the outcomes, so I always said with freedom comes accountability. So I'm going to give you freedom. You can work whatever, but by Friday, we need to have this part ready. So don't wait until the end of a 6-month project to check in with your team what's going on. No, but you don't need to check on them daily. And that's the thing, that's the huge difference. We jump from total, I don't know what's going on, to total control. None works. I think that in most consulting firms, you have more than one people involved per project, so that there's just the leader or the owner of the shop, but also peer-to-peer accountability. If I'm taking care of one part of the project, you're taking care of another, at some point, Michael and Gustavo need to touch base to see how each is doing.
Yeah,
I think that's the most important thing. It's clear communication. I think also discuss with the team. So I think that don't try to figure out I was talking to a large, no names mentioned, large retailer from Minneapolis today. And one of the things that they're struggling with and they're working on is changing the leaders' mindset. So leaders don't need to have all the solutions. This workplace, the hybrid environment, is new for everyone. So accept that you don't have the answers and involve your team and tell them, be honest. Hey guys, I want to trust you. I want to give you flexibility, but hey, I need you to deliver the goods. So I don't want to be controlling, but I want to realize 3 months from now that you're way behind it. So how can we do it? So invite them to, and people are going to come with it, because at the point it's at stake, they don't want to lose flexibility. So you offer them, give me some way of keeping you accountable. Let's do it.
Right.
You can also need to have, having either daily or weekly one-on-ones with your team, not to check, hey, how are you doing? But basically, what's going on? Are you stuck? Are you having any problems? Do you need my help? Do you need resources? So, no, boom. Yeah, and you have that meeting on the calendar. And if there's nothing to discuss, say, hey, nothing to discuss, no update, perfect. See you tomorrow or next week.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great points, Gustavo. That's what we try and do here internally is we have weekly one-on-one meetings with core team members. And then, as you said, nobody wants to be micromanaged and nobody wants to have too many meetings. But if you're very clear and you establish what are the outcomes that we're working towards, and everybody knows that, then you can allow people the freedom. And as long as they're getting those things done, right, then you don't need to be worried about how they're necessarily getting done, as long as the outcome is being achieved and it's the one that you both agreed on. So that's fantastic. Before we wrap up, and I want to make sure people can learn more about your new book and your work and kind of find out everything that you have going on. I'd like to know, so you run your business, which you're very successful at. You have your book. What are one or two things that you do on a regular basis, Gustavo, that you feel are really key to your performance and to your ability to make progress and to have energy when you show up and to really just achieve the success that you have? Any habits or just things that you're doing on a regular basis that you feel are key?
Yeah, I'm very intentional about how I design my week, my work week.
Tell me about
to make sure, I always said, either you manage your time or someone's going to manage or steal it for you. No? So I protect my morning every Monday. I never have meetings. Doesn't matter who called me. From 7 to 11 or 11:30, that's writing time. That's the moment I use, because usually I jot some outlines during the weekend, but then I start my Monday writing, and there's no interruption, no emails. I don't check anything else than that. The same way, Friday PM, unless I have a large workshop with the clients, I always block all my afternoon, and that's winding down time. So I can choose to work, I can choose to go somewhere else, so I can choose to organize, wrap up whatever needs to happen next week. So that's kind of very important. The other thing that has helped me a lot is using Calendly for scheduling.
Sure.
Not only the back and forth is really unproductive, but also I define the different types of engagements. If they're going to be a 5, 15, 20 minutes. So not only I'm showing the person where I'm available, but also I'm giving them okay, for me, this is a 15-minute meeting, no more. So can we have an hour? If you don't set boundaries, people are going to book long meetings because that's the default.
Yeah.
But also having blocks in between. So I never have back-to-backs. I always have cushions in between meetings if some meeting goes longer, but also I want to switch, grab a coffee and take notes from the meeting that just ended before I jump into the next one. So I think that the design is basically the most important thing that I can share as a tip. And then the consistency, as I mentioned earlier, I have a plan and say, well, every week I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And I do it. Sometimes I fail because I'm not perfect, but I stick to my plan most of the weeks. And if not, when I don't hit myself. Sometimes I don't have anything to say. I cannot write. I'm in a block. And I learned to say, okay, I need to give myself some permission to, hey, today skip my weekly routine and the world's not going to collapse. So the world collapses when you start giving away your routine every day and you create a routine of not showing up. But not showing up once is not. So also be tender to yourself. Don't hit yourself too hard. Huh?
And then finally, in the last 6 months or so, if you were to recommend a book, it could be fiction or nonfiction, something that you read or listened to, could be completely out of the realm of business, but just anything that you've enjoyed, what comes to mind for you?
I like Think Again by Adam Grant. I think I read, probably a little bit over that, but still, it's one of my most recent books there somewhere.
Why would you say it's one of your favorites? Just focus on that one.
I think because it's business or not, I don't know, it has a little bit of business, but for me, it's because about thinking. I think that we talk a lot about people having to think, but we don't think a lot about how we think.
Yeah.
And we're so busy jumping from one thing to another. I think that we lost the art of thinking, to be honest. Now people are just doing stuff. No one is, if you see most decisions that leaders make on a daily basis, say, what's going on? Because people don't stop to think. They don't basically make that space. They're not.
That's a really, yeah, I think that's a very good point. And I have a very similar schedule to you in that my Mondays and Fridays are different than, for me, core days of kind of quote unquote work are Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But Mondays and Fridays tend to be days more for strategy, for planning, for thinking. And I'm a big believer in just carving that time out, especially if you're in a role where you are leading people and you need to make important decisions. Having that time to be thoughtful is so critical. So that's a great recommendation. We'll have that linked up in the show notes. And then finally, Gustavo, I want to make sure that people can learn more about you, your work, your book. Where's the one place that we should send them?
Yeah, I always said LinkedIn is easier because there are not other Gustavo Razzetti. So if you spell my name correctly with 2 Z's and 2 T's, then you're going to find me. And if not, you can go to our company website, which is fearlessculture.design, and you're going to find us.
There we go. Well, Gustavo,
newsletter, all that stuff.
Yeah, we'll have that linked up as well. Thank you so much for coming on here. And I appreciate you sharing your experience and just kind of talking through this today. So thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. I really enjoyed the call and it went super fast.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.